The alarms wailed through the fifth floor of Harrison Technologies. Red lights pulsed in sync with the klaxon's screech. Men and women in tailored suits and starched shirts gathered around computer screens, their faces bathed in the electronic glow of impending disaster. The company's firewall had been breached, a sophisticated attack unlike any they'd seen. On every monitor, the same message flashed in crimson. Customer data was being extracted in an algorithmic assault that bypassed every defense system they had. A digital countdown showed just 3 minutes remaining before the breach would be complete. The head of IT threw his hands up in defeat. In the corner of the boardroom, a voice emerged from an unexpected source. Small, hesitant, but somehow sure. A child's voice. "I think I know how to stop it." The room fell silent as every head turned toward the small figure. An 8-year-old girl with auburn hair and knowing eyes that seemed much older than her years. 1 hour earlier, Wesley Parker stood in the vast marble lobby of Harrison Technologies, his palm damp with nervous sweat as it held his daughter's tiny hand. At 38, he still cut an impressive figure. Tall, with shoulders that spoke of an athlete's past, though the dark circles beneath his eyes revealed a different story. His navy suit had been pressed the night before, a ritual of hope that this interview might finally be the one to pull him from the financial abyss that had threatened to swallow him and Maisie since his wife's death. The receptionist glanced up from behind a sleek desk of polished chrome and glass, her professional smile faltering as her gaze fell on Maisie. "Mr. Parker, I see you've brought company." The last word dripped with judgment. Wesley straightened his already rigid spine. "My childcare arrangements fell through last minute. I hope it won't be a problem." Behind him, 3 other candidates waiting for their own interviews exchanged glances, their suppressed smiles communicating what their voices didn't. One woman whispered to her neighbor, just loud enough for Wesley to hear. "Someone didn't read the room." The receptionist sighed heavily. "I suppose it can't be helped now. Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Wesley guided Maisie to a chair, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Remember what we talked about?" Quiet as a mouse. Maisie nodded solemnly, her small hands clutching the worn backpack on her lap. Inside was the tablet Wesley had sacrificed, a month's grocery budget to purchase, loaded with coding games he'd designed to keep her mind occupied during long waits. In her top-floor office, Clare Harrison watched the scene unfold on her security monitor. At 35, she'd built Harrison Technologies from a struggling startup to one of the most respected cybersecurity firms in the country. Her office, minimalist, dominated by glass and steel, reflected the precision with which she approached everything in life. On her desk sat a single photograph, Clare shaking hands with the governor at last year's Technology Innovation Awards. No family photos, no personal touches. Her expression remained neutral as she observed Wesley and his daughter, but something in her eyes lingered on them a moment longer than necessary. She tapped her desk intercom. "Judith, who's the candidate with the child?" Her assistant's voice replied promptly, "Wesley Parker, interviewing for the senior security analyst position, former lead engineer at CyberShield." Claire's finger hovered over the button. "His resume?" "Impressive background, but a 3-year employment gap." Claire released the button without further comment, her gaze returning to the monitor. Something about the man's posture, protective yet dignified, caught her attention. In her world of algorithms and firewalls, human elements were often the most unpredictable variables. Wesley had once been the rising star at CyberShield, pioneering security protocols that had become industry standards. He remembered the corner office with a view of the city skyline, the respect in colleagues' eyes, the comfortable life he had provided for Sarah and their newborn Maisie. Then came the call that changed everything. Sarah's car, the rainy highway, the truck driver who'd fallen asleep at the wheel. In the hospital corridor, still in his presentation suit, he'd made his decision even before the doctor had finished speaking. Maisie would not lose both parents to corporate America's insatiable appetite for time and attention. He resigned the following day, cashed out his stocks, and became a full-time father to a 1-year-old who cried for a mother she would never remember. The life insurance payout had sustained them longer than expected, But after 3 years, the financial reality had become impossible to ignore. Their apartment was modest, a 2-bedroom unit in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Each night, after tucking Maisie into bed with stories of her mother's courage and kindness, Wesley would open his laptop and search job listings until his eyes burned. The technical world had continued its relentless evolution during his absence, leaving him scrambling to learn new languages, new protocols, new security paradigms, through online courses taken during Maisie's nap times and after her bedtime. That morning, as he had knotted his tie, Maisie had appeared in the doorway of the bathroom, already dressed in her neatly pressed blue dress, her backpack ready. "You'll get this one, Daddy," she'd said, with the unwavering certainty of childhood. "I know it." Wesley had smiled, ruffling her hair, wishing he could borrow some of her confidence. When the babysitter called to cancel, a sudden flu, he'd nearly given up, but Maisie had simply taken his hand and said, "I can be good, I promise." And so here they were, their futures balanced on the knife edge of professional judgment. The interview room felt instantly hostile. 4 evaluators sat across a polished conference table, their expressions ranging from surprise to thinly veiled disdain as Wesley entered with Maisie in tow. "Mr. Parker," began the oldest of the group, a man with silver at his temples and coldness in his eyes. "This is highly unusual." Wesley guided Maisie to a chair in the corner of the room. "I understand, and I apologize. My sitter canceled at the last minute and I didn't want to miss this opportunity." He handed Maisie her tablet, whispering instructions to stay quiet. The interviewers exchanged glances that communicated volumes. This candidate had already failed. The questions began like artillery fire. "Explain the 3-year gap in your employment. How familiar are you with the advancements in cybersecurity since you left the field? Do you honestly believe you can step back into a senior role after such an extended absence?" Each question was designed to expose weakness, to justify the decision they'd already made. One interviewer barely looked up from his phone during Wesley's responses. Another checked her watch repeatedly. Maisie sat silently in her corner, her eyes moving from face to face, missing nothing, her small fingers occasionally swiping across her tablet screen, not playing games as the interviewers assumed, but actually running simple diagnostic programs her father had taught her, learning about network architecture as naturally as other children learn nursery rhymes. Wesley maintained his dignity through it all, answering with clarity and confidence despite the undercurrent of dismissal that permeated the room. "After my wife's death, I chose to focus on raising our daughter. During that time, I've kept up with industry developments through online courses and independent consulting work. My skills haven't diminished. They've adapted." The female interviewer raised an eyebrow. "Adapted how exactly?" "Quantum encryption protocols have completely transformed the security landscape in the past 18 months alone." The lights flickered midway through Wesley's response about zero-knowledge-proof implementation. The overhead fluorescents blinked once, twice, then dimmed as emergency lighting activated. A high-pitched alarm began to sound throughout the building. The interview panel looked at each other in confusion until the door burst open. A young man in a rumpled button-down shirt, the company logo embroidered on the breast pocket, rushed in. "We're under attack," he gasped, his face pale with panic. "All systems compromised. Someone's bypassed every firewall we have." The interview forgotten, the panel members scrambled to their feet. More staff rushed in, laptops clutched in desperate hands. On every screen, the same cascading failure. Defenses falling like dominoes, customer data being siphoned into the digital ether. The countdown timer appeared, 5 minutes until complete system breach. Wesley and Maisie were pushed to the side, forgotten in the crisis as executives streamed into what had now become the center of disaster response. Through the glass walls, Wesley could see similar panic erupting across the office floor. Security analysts frantically typing, managers shouting into phones, the ordered world of corporate technology dissolving into chaos. Then came a commanding presence, Clare herself, striding into the room with the controlled urgency of someone who had faced crises before. "Status report," she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. As the head of IT babbled explanations, Wesley felt a tug on his sleeve. Maisie was looking up at him, her eyes wide but focused. "Daddy," she whispered, "I think I know what they're doing. It looks like the game you made for me. The one where you have to find the hidden door. Wesley hesitated, watching the room full of professionals failing to address a threat that was second by second destroying everything they had built. He raised his hand like a schoolboy, his voice almost lost in the cacophony. "Excuse me." No one turned. "Excuse me." Louder this time. A few heads swiveled in his direction, annoyance clear on their faces at this interruption from the forgotten interview candidate. "My daughter, she thinks she might be able to help." The statement was met with disbelief. Someone laughed, a short, harsh sound quickly swallowed. "Maybe we should call in a kindergarten class to help," muttered one executive. Clare Harrison, however, had gone completely still. Her eyes moved from Wesley to Maisie, a calculation happening behind them that no one else could see. "Let her try," she said finally, her voice cutting through the objections before they could form. "We have nothing to lose at this point." The room fell silent as Clare herself walked over to Maisie, gesturing toward the main terminal. "Show us," she said simply. Maisie approached the computer with the quiet confidence of someone entering familiar territory. Her small fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a series of commands that seemed impossible for her age. She navigated through layers of code with intuitive ease, finding patterns in the chaos that had eluded the professionals. "The attack is coming through a back door in your update server," she explained, her child's voice incongruous with the technical language. "It's using your own authentication protocols against you." With methodical precision, she isolated the intrusion pathway, creating a containment perimeter around the breach. The countdown slowed, then stopped. The data extraction halted. System by system, the network stabilized as Maisie executed her final commands. The room had fallen into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of her typing. When she finished, she looked up at the circle of adult faces staring down at her. "It's fixed now," she said simply. "But you should probably change your root passwords. They're not very good." The IT director pushed forward, checking the systems with frantic energy. "She's right," he confirmed, his voice thick with disbelief. "The attack has been neutralized." His eyes shifted to Maisie with newfound respect. "She found a backdoor vulnerability that we didn't even know existed. One that would have been virtually impossible to detect without intimate knowledge of our architecture." Clare Harrison moved closer to Wesley, her professional mask now layered with something new. Curiosity, perhaps even respect. "Your previous role at CyberShield," she said, her voice lowered for his ears alone. "You worked on kernel protection protocols, didn't you?" Wesley nodded, watching his daughter as she explained something to the gathering of IT professionals, who now hung on her every word. "Yes, I developed several of the underlying security frameworks that are still industry standards." Claire studied him with new intensity. "And your daughter? Has she received formal training in programming?" Wesley smiled slightly. "No, she taught herself, using my old laptop. She has a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding systems. I created simple games to teach her the basics, but she quickly surpassed what I was teaching." Claire nodded slowly, her gaze shifting back to Maisie. Without another word, she turned and left the room, but Wesley noticed the change in her posture. Something had shifted in her assessment, not just of him, but of the small girl who had accomplished what her entire security team could not. The silver-haired interviewer approached Wesley, his earlier condescension replaced by a strange mixture of embarrassment and awe. "Mr. Parker, I believe we may have misjudged you and your unusual circumstances." Wesley maintained his dignified composure, though inside a small flame of vindication had sparked to life. "Perhaps we should continue our interview another time," he suggested. "I believe your company has some security updates to implement." 3 days later, an email arrived in Wesley's inbox that he had to read 3 times to believe. Not only was he being offered a position at Harrison Technologies, but it was for a role on their most classified initiative, the Gatekeeper Project, developing next-generation security protocols for critical infrastructure. The salary was double what he had expected. Attached was a second offer, a place for Maisie in the exclusive Young Innovators program that Clare Harrison personally sponsored, a technology education initiative for gifted children that was typically reserved for the offspring of political figures and technology elites. Wesley sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face in the pre-dawn darkness. Reading the offers again and again, Maisie slept in her room, unaware that her life was about to change completely. He thought of the years of struggle, of stretching dollars until they screamed, of the nights spent wondering if he'd made the right choice in stepping away from his career. He thought of Sarah and what she would say if she could see their daughter now. Not just smart, but extraordinary, in a way that demanded the world make room for her gift. The following day, Wesley found himself in Clare's office, the city spread out below them through floor-to-ceiling windows. The office was striking in its lack of personality, no art on the walls, no plants, nothing to indicate the person behind the position. Clare stood with her back to him, looking out at the skyline. "I don't trust resumes, Mr. Parker," she said without turning. "I trust people who step up when everyone else is stepping back." She faced him then, her expression carefully controlled. "What your daughter did was extraordinary, but it also exposed critical vulnerabilities in our systems that we should have caught. I need people who see what others miss." Wesley felt something loosen in his chest, a tension that had been his constant companion for 3 years. "This means everything to us," he said simply. For just a moment, something flickered across Clare's face, a flash of emotion quickly contained. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the best talents are the ones we overlook." The statement seemed to carry more weight than its surface meaning. But before Wesley could respond, she had moved on to discussing the details of his role, the professional mask firmly back in place. Weeks passed, and Wesley settled into a rhythm at Harassing Technologies. The Gatekeeper project was challenging work that demanded the best of his abilities, but for the first time in years he felt fully alive in his professional capacity. The team he led was developing security protocols that would protect power grids, water systems, and transportation networks from the kind of attack that had nearly crippled Harassing Technologies itself. His colleagues, initially skeptical of the comeback kid, as one had dubbed him, quickly came to respect his innovative approaches and the depth of knowledge he brought to the project. Maisie thrived in the Young Innovators program, coming home each day bubbling with new knowledge and achievements. "Dad, I learned about quantum entanglement today," she would announce, proceeding to explain concepts that most adults would struggle to grasp. They had moved to a better apartment closer to the office, and the financial pressure that had been Wesley's constant companion had finally lifted. He began to notice small changes in his interactions with Clare Harrison. Where initially their meetings had been strictly professional, focused entirely on the project, she had begun to linger afterward, asking questions that went beyond work parameters. "How is Maisie adjusting to the program?" she asked one evening, as they reviewed security protocols after the rest of the team had gone home. Wesley looked up from his notes, surprised by the personal nature of the question. "She loves it. She's always been quick to learn, but having actual guidance rather than just figuring things out on her own, it's made a world of difference." Clare nodded, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the conference table. "And you? How are you managing both work and parenting?" It was the first time she had acknowledged the dual nature of his life. "It's easier now," Wesley admitted. "Having financial stability means I can be more present for her, not constantly worried about our next meal or rent payment." He paused, then added softly, "And I think she's proud of me again. That matters more than I expected it would." The conversation shifted, becoming something neither of them had anticipated, an actual exchange between two people rather than two professionals. Wesley found himself sharing stories of his hardest days as a single parent, the time Maisie had a fever of 104 degrees, and he'd sat up all night beside her bed, terrified and alone. The parent-teacher conferences where he felt the absence of Sarah like a physical pain. The birthdays where he tried to be both mother and father to a little girl who only knew her mother through photographs and stories. "The hardest part," he confessed, "is knowing that no matter what I do, there's a gap in her life I can never fill, a perspective I can never provide." To his surprise, Clare began to reciprocate with small revelations of her own, her rise through the male-dominated tech industry, the sacrifices she had made for her career, the relationship with a business partner who had ultimately betrayed her, stealing both her trust and her intellectual property. "That's why Harassing Technologies has such rigorous security," she explained, a rare vulnerability showing through her composed exterior. I learned the hard way that trust must be verified. She described nights spent rebuilding her company from the ashes of betrayal, the isolation of leadership, the weight of knowing that hundreds of employees and thousands of clients depended on her decisions. People see the success, she said, swirling the remains of her coffee. They don't see the cost. The revelation shifted something between them, a mutual recognition of wounds carried privately, and the strength required to move forward despite them. They were, Wesley realized, both survivors of different shipwrecks, still learning to navigate with damaged compasses. Late one night, after a particularly tense meeting regarding a potential security breach that proved to be a false alarm, Claire and Wesley found themselves alone in the conference room. The office was empty, the city lights creating a constellation of human activity beyond the windows. They sat in companionable silence, the pressure of the day slowly dissipating in the quiet. "I never thought I'd say this," Claire said finally, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "But your daughter, she makes me feel safe." Wesley looked at her, surprised by the admission. "How so?" Claire smiled slightly, her professional armor momentarily set aside. "In a world where we're constantly vulnerable to invisible threats, where every system can be compromised, she reminds me that there are minds out there capable of seeing the problems before they destroy us. Minds that approach problems without the limitations we've taught ourselves." She paused, her fingers lightly tapping against her coffee cup. "And she reminds me that not everyone with extraordinary abilities is looking to exploit them for personal gain." She looked directly at Wesley then, her gaze unguarded for perhaps the first time since they'd met. "She gets that from you, I think, that integrity." Wesley felt warmth spread through his chest at the unexpected praise. "And I never thought anyone in that interview room would actually listen," he admitted. "You were the only one who saw past the circumstances to the possibilities." The moments stretched between them, an unspoken connection neither was quite ready to name. Then Claire straightened, her professional demeanor sliding back into place like a shield. "The project timeline needs to be accelerated," she said. And just like that, they were colleagues again. But something had shifted, a foundation laid for whatever might come next. As summer faded into autumn, small changes began to appear in their daily interactions. Claire would bring coffee for Wesley when she arrived in the morning, remembering exactly how he took it: 1 sugar, splash of cream. Wesley noticed when Claire skipped meals during intensive work periods and would ensure food appeared on her desk without comment. Simple, nourishing things that could be eaten with one hand while continuing to work. They developed a shorthand in meetings that sometimes left other team members struggling to follow their rapid exchange of ideas. "The Nash approach?" Claire would ask, and Wesley would shake his head. "Too vulnerable on the Eastern Front. I'm thinking more layman with a Tanaka modification." And Claire would nod, immediately understanding the direction he proposed. Maisie became a frequent topic of conversation, her progress in the program, her unique approaches to technological problems, her insights that sometimes left her instructors baffled. "She created an entirely new encryption algorithm yesterday," Claire mentioned one afternoon. "Her instructors are still trying to break it." Wesley laughed. "That's my girl making trouble." With each conversation, each shared moment of success or concern, the walls that Claire had built around herself seemed to lower slightly. The staff began to notice. Whispers circulated about the change in the CEO, how she sometimes smiled at Wesley's jokes in meetings, how she had been seen eating lunch in the cafeteria rather than alone in her office, how she had actually taken a weekend off for the first time in years. Wesley found himself looking forward to their interactions in a way that went beyond professional satisfaction. One afternoon, as they worked side by side debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code, their hands brushed. The contact lasted only a second, but Wesley felt it like an electrical current. Claire's typing faltered for just a moment before resuming its steady rhythm, the only indication that she had felt it too. As autumn deepened toward winter, the Gatekeeper project entered its final testing phase. The team had created something revolutionary, a security system that adapted to threats in real time, learning from each attack attempt to strengthen itself, much like a human immune system. Wesley had led the development with a brilliance that had cemented his reputation within the company. No longer was he seen as the comeback story, the single dad who'd gotten lucky. He was respected for his mind, for his vision, for his ability to see vulnerabilities others missed. Maisie had become something of a mascot for the Young Innovators program, her achievements celebrated in company newsletters. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the city, Wesley worked late, finalizing the presentation for the project's official launch. The office had emptied hours ago, only the cleaning staff moving quietly through the darkened corridors. A soft knock on his door made him look up. A year or two ago, Wesley had been happy to take. Clare stood there, holding 2 cups of steaming tea. "Thought you might need this," she said, entering his office. She looked different, softer somehow, her usual tailored suit replaced by a simple sweater and slacks, her hair loose around her shoulders, rather than pulled back in its customary severe style. "Thanks," Wesley said, accepting the cup gratefully. "Just putting the finishing touches on tomorrow's presentation." Clare sat in the chair across from his desk, curling her legs beneath her in a surprisingly casual posture. "It's going to change everything, you know," she said, her eyes bright with rare animation. "What we've built here, it's not just another security product, it's a new paradigm." Wesley nodded, understanding her excitement because he shared it. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this again," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over." Clare studied him over the rim of her cup. "You found your way back." It wasn't a question, but Wesley answered anyway. "With help. With someone willing to take a chance on me." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, acknowledgement of a journey shared, of mutual respect that had grown into something neither had anticipated. Months passed, the seasons changing outside the glass walls of Harassing Technologies, while inside, the Gatekeeper project moved from development to implementation. Wesley had fully reclaimed his professional identity while creating something new, a balance between the dedicated father he had become and the innovative engineer he had always been. Maisie continued to flourish in the Young Innovators program, regularly sending her father text messages during the day, got the highest score on the encryption challenge, or simply, "They said I'm breaking records." Clare had remained Clare, focused, brilliant, demanding, but those who had known her longest noticed subtle differences. She smiled more readily. She occasionally left the office before midnight, and her interactions with Wesley Parker had developed a warmth that sparked speculation among the staff. One morning, Wesley arrived late to the daily project briefing, having dealt with a minor emergency at Maisie's school. As he slipped into the conference room, apologizing for his tardiness, Clare looked up from her presentation. "I think I've gotten used to having you around, Mr. Parker," she said, the formal address belied by the warmth in her voice. "Try not to make a habit of disappearing." The team chuckled, but Wesley caught the glint in Clare's eyes, something playful and genuine that had been absent when they first met. He smiled in return, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. "Wouldn't dream of it, Miss Harrison," he replied, matching her tone exactly. The moment passed, the meeting continued, but something had been communicated between them. Not a declaration, but a possibility, a door left deliberately open. Later that day, they stood together in the company's demonstration room, watching as the Gatekeeper system successfully repelled a simulated attack of unprecedented complexity. As the test concluded successfully, the team erupted in cheers and applause. In the midst of the celebration, Clare's hand found Wesley's, squeezing briefly before letting go. The touch was fleeting, but its significance was not. It was an anchor point, a moment of human connection in a world of digital barriers and firewalls. The success of the Gatekeeper project brought Harassing Technologies to new prominence in the cybersecurity world. Industry awards, government contracts, and international recognition flowed in. Wesley found himself featured in technology magazines. His journey from top engineer to stay-at-home dad and back to innovation leader celebrated as an inspirational narrative. The balance that Wesley Parker has achieved between professional excellence and devoted parenting challenges our industry's traditional work models, wrote one influential tech blogger. Maisie took the attention in stride, more interested in the new coding challenges her instructors provided than in the media's fascination with her family story. Through it all, The relationship between Wesley and Claire continued to evolve in small, meaningful increments. They never spoke directly about what was developing between them, both too cautious, too marked by past wounds to risk naming something that might dissolve under scrutiny. But there were moments, a lingering glance across a crowded room, a text message sent late at night simply to share a thought, a hand on an arm that remained there just a moment longer than necessary. The company holiday party found them standing together on the balcony of the venue, overlooking the snow-covered city. "Did you ever imagine this?" Claire asked, her breath visible in the cold air. "A year ago, I mean." Wesley shook his head. "Not even close. A year ago, I was worried about making rent and whether Maisie's winter coat would last another season." He looked at her profile, illuminated by the city lights. "And you? Did you imagine having an 8-year-old security consultant on staff?" Claire laughed, the sound unguarded and genuine. "Definitely not on my 5-year plan." She turned to face him fully. "But I'm glad life doesn't always follow our carefully constructed plans." For a moment, Wesley thought she might say more, might finally put words to the current that had been running between them for months. Instead, she smiled and turned back to the view. But she moved closer to him, their shoulders touching as they stood in companionable silence, watching the snow fall on the city below. As the workday ended, Wesley packed his laptop into his messenger bag, preparing to pick up Maisie from her program. His phone buzzed with a text from his daughter. "Made a breakthrough on my project. Can't wait to show you." He smiled, a surge of pride warming him from within. As he headed toward the elevator, he passed Claire's office. She was still there, as she always was, silhouetted against the evening sky. She looked up as he passed, their eyes meeting through the glass. He raised his hand in a small wave and she nodded in acknowledgement, a simple exchange that somehow contained much more than was visible on the surface. The elevator doors opened, and Wesley stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors began to close, a hand shot through the gap, causing them to reopen. Claire stepped in beside him. "I thought I might walk with you," she said, her tone casual, though the occurrence was unprecedented. "If that's all right." Wesley nodded, surprised but pleased. Of course. They descended in silence, but it was a comfortable one, the kind that exists between people who no longer need to fill every moment with words. In the lobby, they walked together toward the main doors, their pace unhurried despite the late hour. "Maisie mentioned she's working on something special," Claire said as they approached the exit. "Some kind of new security protocol?" Wesley smiled. "She's been very secretive about it. All I know is that it involves what she calls human intuitive authentication, whatever that means." Claire laughed softly. "That child is going to revolutionize this industry before she's old enough to drive." They pushed through the doors into the crisp evening air, their conversation continuing as they walked across the plaza toward the Young Innovators building, two figures moving in sync through the gathering dusk. In her top-floor office, Claire Harrison watched from the window as Wesley met Maisie outside the Young Innovators building. The little girl launched herself into her father's arms, her excitement visible even from this distance, as she gesticulated wildly, likely explaining her latest accomplishment. Wesley listened with his full attention, nodding and smiling as they walked hand in hand toward the subway entrance. Claire had returned to her office after walking with Wesley, drawn back to the window by a pull she didn't fully understand. Her reflection appeared in the glass before her, a successful woman who had built an empire on the ashes of betrayal, who had learned to trust systems and code more than people. Yet something had shifted in that reflection. The hard edges had softened, not into weakness, but into possibility. Her hand rose to the glass, a gesture she herself seemed surprised by. "Sometimes," she whispered to the empty office, "the ones we laugh at are the ones who end up saving everything." She wasn't sure if she meant the child who had saved her company's data or the father who had, perhaps, begun to save something else entirely. Something she had locked away so successfully she had almost forgotten it existed. She turned from the window, gathering her things. For the first time in years, Claire Harrison left the office before sunset, stepping into a world that suddenly seemed filled with unexpected possibilities. As she rode the elevator down to the lobby, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her company to the rebuilding that had made it stronger. From the walls she had constructed around herself to the small openings that now allowed light to filter through. She thought about Wesley and Maisie Parker, the unlikely duo who had appeared in her carefully ordered world and somehow changed its fundamental variables. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clare Harrison found herself looking forward to tomorrow not just for what she would accomplish, but for who she would see. The elevator doors opened onto the empty lobby and she stepped out into the evening, following the same path Wesley and Maisie had taken minutes before, not to catch up with them, but simply to walk in their footsteps for a moment, to feel connected to the new possibility they represented in her life. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, bright points of light in the vastness, separate, distant, but somehow forming patterns that, when viewed together, told stories that had guided travelers for centuries.